I used to think embarrassment was the worst thing that could happen. But try walking into a room full of people, ready to tear you apart with their eyes, only to see the man you humiliated standing there as the hero of the night. One cold stare and a few sharp words, and suddenly, your entire world starts to crumble. Imagine trying to keep your composure while everyone watches you drown. But let's rewind to where it all began. Thomas McGill wasn't your average tourist. Oh no, this man strolled into London like it was his personal movie set and he was the main character. You could practically hear an invisible soundtrack playing behind him, something grand and obnoxious, like trumpets announcing royalty. At 35 years old, he carried himself with the kind of self-assured arrogance that only came from a lifetime of being told he was better than the rest. His parents, wealthy and entitled themselves, had drilled it into his head early on. Rules were for other people. Thomas? He was above them. London wasn't new to tourists like him. They came, they snapped a few photos, made some bad fish and chips jokes, and left. But Thomas had plans to leave a mark that involved a royal guard who was about to have the most infuriating encounter of his life. Buckingham Palace stood like a fortress of British history, its gates towering and elegant, flanked by the iconic guards in their red uniforms and tall bearskin hats. To most visitors, these guards were symbols of tradition and honor. To Thomas, they were just statues to mess with. He leaned against a nearby barrier, sipping on a cocktail he'd picked up from a nearby cafe. His eyes zeroed in on one guard in particular. The man was tall, with dark skin and a presence that commanded respect, even in complete stillness. His name was James Miller, though Thomas, of course, had no idea who he was or what he stood for. All Thomas saw was an opportunity for a cheap thrill. James, however, was no ordinary guard. At 29, he had dedicated his life to service, driven by a sense of purpose instilled in him by his father, a veteran who had always taught him to hold his head high no matter the circumstances. But no amount of dignity could fully shield James from the undercurrent of racism and ignorance he faced. Even as a royal guard, he was subjected to microaggressions, little digs, and comments from tourists who thought they could get away with it. Yet, James stood firm, never letting his emotions betray him. It was a test of willpower every day. Today, however, was shaping up to be different. Thomas crossed his arms and smirked, turning to the group of friends he dragged along for this royal experience. One of them, a blonde named Ashley, designer handbag in tow, nudged him playfully. She had that look in her eyes, mischief, boredom, and a craving for some social media-worthy content. "Hey, Tommy," she teased, her voice dripping with amusement. "I dare you to mess with that guy. I mean, come on, it's not like he's allowed to fight back, right? You could dump your drink on him and he wouldn't even blink. Imagine how many likes that video would get." Thomas chuckled, the idea settling in his mind like a challenge he couldn't refuse. He glanced at his cocktail, a colorful, overpriced concoction that was more style than substance, and grinned. "You're on," he said confidently. "Watch this." Ashley and the others giggled in anticipation, phones already aimed at the scene. Thomas strutted forward, his steps deliberate and exaggerated, as if he were performing on stage. The crowd around the palace gates began to notice. Their curiosity piqued. A few murmurs rippled through the tourists as they watched the scene unfold. James remained still, his gaze fixed ahead. His peripheral vision caught the approaching figure, but he didn't flinch. He'd seen this routine before, people trying to provoke him for entertainment. He braced himself, mentally preparing for whatever stunt was about to be pulled. "Hey, soldier boy," Thomas called out, his voice loud enough to draw more attention. He took another step closer, his grin widening as he saw the crowd's growing interest. "Bet you can't even move if I do this, huh?" And with that, Thomas raised his cup and in one swift motion poured the cold, sticky liquid directly onto James's pristine red uniform. Gasps echoed through the crowd like a shockwave. Time seemed to freeze as everyone stared at the scene in disbelief. The vibrant stain spread across James's sleeve, a stark contrast to the crisp, formal attire he wore. Children clung to their parents, wide-eyed and confused. One boy, probably no older than 8, tugged at his mother's hand and whispered urgently, "Mom, why did he do that? That was really mean." The woman hushed him gently, her own expression caught between horror and outrage. Meanwhile, Thomas stood tall, basking in what he thought was a triumphant moment. He turned back to his friends, expecting applause or at least some cheers. Instead, there was a brief, awkward silence as the full weight of what he had done sank in. Ashley was still recording, but looked visibly uneasy now. "Oh, come on," Thomas scoffed, rolling his eyes. "It's just a joke. Look, he didn't even move, see? No harm done?" But James's silence wasn't the passive acceptance Thomas assumed it to be. Beneath the surface, anger simmered like a fire ready to erupt. He clenched his jaw imperceptibly, fighting the urge to react. Protocol was clear. Royal Guards were not to engage, no matter the provocation. James had mastered the art of self-control, but even a man of steel had his breaking point. The crowd began to stir, whispers spreading like wildfire. "Did you see that? Who does he think he is? Unbelievable. He just assaulted a guard. That's disgusting. Someone should report him." Thomas pretended not to hear the growing discontent, dismissing it with a wave of his hand. He was too caught up in his own delusions of grandeur to notice the shift in atmosphere. But James noticed. He noticed everything. He stood there, drenched and humiliated, yet he refused to give Thomas the satisfaction of a reaction. Still, James knew one thing for certain. This wouldn't end here. Thomas had crossed a line he didn't even realize existed, and sometimes the quietest storms are the ones that hit hardest. The internet has a funny way of elevating nobodies into global sensations overnight, for better or worse. By the time Thomas McGill landed back in New York, he had no idea that his face was plastered across social media feeds worldwide. Someone in the crowd at Buckingham Palace had filmed his stunt in glorious high definition and uploaded it with a title designed to stir the pot. "Tourist harasses Royal Guard, disgraceful or just a joke?" Of course, the comments section didn't hold back. If there's one thing netizens love, it's dragging someone who clearly deserves it. "What is wrong with people? This guy's a disgrace." James Miller, "That guard is a hero for keeping his cool. I would have decked the guy. Why do these entitled clowns think they can treat others like props for their amusement?" The video was shared, reposted, and dissected by commentators from all corners of the internet. Reaction videos popped up with influencers shaking their heads in disgust. Some even using phrases like, "This is exactly why tourists get a bad name." Memes followed swiftly. One particularly viral edit showed Thomas pouring the drink, only for it to magically transform into a bucket of mud in slow motion. The caption read, "When your bad decisions go global." Another meme had a split screen, James standing stoically on one side and Thomas making his smug face on the other with the text, "Dignity versus disaster, choose your fighter." It didn't take long for the media to catch wind of the situation. Headlines like "American tourist sparks of outrage with Buckingham Palace incident" dominated news feeds. The clip played repeatedly on morning talk shows, with hosts analyzing every detail. Social commentators framed it as yet another case of entitlement gone wrong, sparking debates about respect, privilege, and cultural insensitivity. But Thomas? Clueless. The first inkling that something was off came when he entered his office. Usually, his coworkers greeted him with casual banter, maybe a compliment about his recent travels. Not today. The moment Thomas stepped through the doors, he noticed it. People whispering, glancing in his direction, and quickly averting their eyes. The air felt heavy, uneasy. He tried to ignore it, chalking it up to a weird Monday vibe, but the tension only grew stronger as he made his way to his desk. In the break room, two employees were huddled by the coffee machine. As Thomas approached, their conversation halted abruptly. One of them, Emily, couldn't resist shooting him a sideways glare, her voice dripping with disdain. "That's him, the guy from the video. What a jerk," she muttered under her breath, not quite quietly enough. Thomas froze, blinking in confusion. Video? What video? He hadn't posted anything from his trip. What were they talking about? Brushing off the encounter, he logged into his computer, ready to tackle the day's tasks. But even here, things felt off. His email inbox, normally filled with meeting invites and project updates, was eerily quiet. A few messages trickled in, mostly terse notes about postponed meetings or tasks being reassigned to others. His phone buzzed with notifications, but he didn't have time to check them before his boss, Mr. Cartwright, summoned him to his office. Cartwright was a no-nonsense type of guy, Polished, professional, and known for his calm demeanor, he rarely called meetings without good reason. Thomas figured it was about a new project. Instead, he found himself face to face with a man whose patience was visibly thinning. "Thomas," Cartwright began, adjusting his glasses, "we need to address something that's come to my attention." Thomas frowned. "Sure, what's going on?" Cartwright didn't answer immediately. Instead, he turned his monitor around, revealing the now infamous video. Thomas stared at the screen as the events played out in stark, humiliating detail. There he was, grinning like an idiot as he poured his cocktail over the royal guard. The crowd's shocked reactions echoed in his mind, even though the video was muted. "This," Cartwright said pointedly, "has gone viral, and not in a good way. Our clients have seen it. Our partners have seen it. Needless to say, it's problematic." "Problematic?" Thomas repeated, his voice rising defensively. "Come on, it was just a joke. People are blowing this way out of proportion. I didn't hurt anyone." Cartwright's expression hardened. "Perception is everything. Whether you meant harm or not, this incident reflects poorly on the company. We can't afford this kind of negative publicity." "So what are you saying?" Thomas crossed his arms. "You're throwing me under the bus for some internet drama?" "I'm saying," Cartwright replied evenly, "that you need to take responsibility. If this situation doesn't improve, we'll have to reconsider your future here." The message was clear. Reputation mattered, and Thomas's was in free fall. Thomas left the office in a daze, frustration boiling inside him. How had this spiraled out of control so quickly? It wasn't fair. He was the victim of a massive overreaction, targeted by people who didn't understand his intentions. As he walked through the city streets, his phone buzzed incessantly with notifications. Curiosity got the better of him. He scrolled through his social media accounts, only to be met with an avalanche of angry comments. "Apologize, dude. This isn't a joke. You think being rich gives you the right to treat people like dirt? Disgusting. Hope you enjoy being internet famous. You've earned it." Thomas clenched his jaw, muttering under his breath, "Bunch of trolls. They don't know the whole story." But deep down, doubts began to creep in. Maybe he had gone too far. Maybe, just maybe, this wasn't going to blow over as quickly as he'd hoped. Meanwhile, James Miller's life had taken a dramatically different turn. The same video that had tarnished Thomas's name had elevated James to near hero status. Messages of support flooded in from all over the world. "Thank you for keeping your composure. You're an inspiration. The dignity you showed is remarkable. We need more people like you." Colleagues and superiors praised his professionalism. Strangers stopped him in the street to express their admiration. But beneath the surface, James struggled to reconcile the public praise with his private pain. The incident had reopened wounds he thought had long since healed, memories of being bullied in school, of enduring racial slurs and taunts. His father's words echoed in his mind, a reminder of the resilience he had cultivated over the years. "You can't let them break you, son," his father had once told him. "They'll try, but you stand tall, always." James had stood tall that day, but the weight of injustice still lingered. He wasn't interested in revenge, at least not in the petty, theatrical sense. No, his response would be measured, strategic. He knew one thing for certain. Thomas McGill would face consequences far more lasting than a social media firestorm. The world had its eyes on both of them now. And the story was far from over. For Thomas McGill, the gala invitation couldn't have come at a better time. His reputation was circling the drain, and the constant whispers behind his back were starting to wear on him. But this event, this was his chance to bounce back. It wasn't just a gathering. It was the event of the year for global finance and business leaders. The creme de la creme of high society would be there, and if Thomas played his cards right, he could network his way back into their good graces. A few charming conversations, a strategic apology here or there, and people would forget about that incident. At least, that's what he told himself. The venue was a sight to behold, an opulent, historic mansion in the heart of London. The grand entrance was lined with perfectly manicured hedges, each trimmed to geometric precision. A red carpet stretched up the marble steps, leading to towering double doors, carved with intricate patterns. Inside, the ceiling soared high above, adorned with crystal chandeliers that sparkled like constellations. Classical music floated softly through the air, providing an elegant backdrop to the hum of elite conversation. Thomas arrived early, wanting to make a good impression. He stepped out of his black car, adjusted his perfectly tailored navy suit, and took a deep breath. This is it. Show them who you are, he thought. With a confident stride, he ascended the steps, flashing a winning smile at the doorman who nodded politely and let him in. The main hall was breathtaking. The marble floor gleamed under the golden glow of chandeliers. Guests were already mingling, dressed in designer gowns and custom suits. Waiters moved through the crowd like ghosts, offering champagne and hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. The air was thick with the scent of wealth, expensive colognes, fresh-cut flowers, and aged wine. Conversations buzzed around him, peppered with words like acquisition, merger, and investment opportunities. Thomas felt at home here. This was his world, or at least it had been before that cursed video. But tonight, he was determined to reclaim his place among the elite. He scanned the room for familiar faces, planning his first approach. But then it happened. The atmosphere shifted. Slowly, like a ripple spreading across a pond, conversations began to quiet. Heads turned, eyes locked onto Thomas, and not in a friendly way. There was a collective murmur that grew louder by the second, and Thomas felt a pang of unease creep up his spine. Is that him? Yeah, that's the guy, the tourist. No way. What's he doing here? Thomas's steps faltered. He tried to maintain his composure, straightening his shoulders and forcing a smile, but the stares didn't stop. They bore into him, cold and judgmental. He suddenly felt like a specimen under a microscope. What the heck is going on? He wondered, his confidence slipping. Then, like a nail in the coffin, a journalist near the center of the hall spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. Oh, isn't that the infamous tourist who humiliated the royal guard? She said, her voice dripping with mockery. The room froze. A collective gasp echoed through the crowd, followed by hushed whispers that felt deafening to Thomas. He stood there, rooted in place, as waves of recognition spread through the audience. He could feel the heat rising in his face. The polished, unflappable mask he wore began to crack. Seriously? He had the nerve to show up here? I thought he'd be hiding in shame. Does he even realize how bad it was? Thomas's mind raced. Stay calm. Don't panic. Just smile and brush it off. He cleared his throat and tried to laugh, as if the comment had been a harmless joke. Well, I guess I made an impression, he said awkwardly, hoping to diffuse the tension. But no one laughed. If anything, the crowd seemed more intrigued now, watching his every move like vultures circling a wounded animal. And then the crowd parted. Thomas's stomach dropped as he saw who was stepping forward. The man's presence seemed to command the entire room's attention. Dressed in full military regalia, with medals gleaming on his chest, James Miller cut an imposing figure. His posture was perfect, his gaze steady and piercing. He moved with the calm confidence of someone who didn't need to raise his voice to be heard. Thomas's heart pounded in his chest. No, it can't be. Not here, not now. But it was. James Miller, the very guard he had humiliated at Buckingham Palace, was now standing just a few feet away. The crowd around them fell into complete silence, their eyes darting between the two men like spectators at a gladiatorial match. The tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. James stopped, his face devoid of emotion. He let the moment stretch, allowing the weight of the situation to fully sink in. Then, with a voice as smooth as silk, but sharp as a blade, he spoke. Good evening, Mr. McGill, James said, his words perfectly measured. Nice to see you again. The room collectively held its breath. Thomas's throat went dry. He managed a weak smile and awkwardly extended his hand. Hey, James, right? Wow, what are the odds? Small world, Thomas stammered, his voice cracking slightly. It's, good to see you. James didn't move. He simply stared at Thomas's outstretched hand until the latter awkwardly dropped it to his side. The silence dragged on, suffocating and relentless. Funny how things come full circle, isn't it? James continued, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of menace. 1 minute, you're the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. The next, well, here we are. Thomas felt his confidence shatter completely. The room seemed to close in around him. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the marble floor and vanish from sight. Look, about what happened back then. James cut him off, stepping slightly closer. His voice lowered, but the intensity only increased. Save it. You thought you could get away with disrespect because of protocol. You assumed I couldn't respond. But here's the thing, McGill. Consequences have a funny way of catching up with you. The crowd remained eerily silent, their eyes glued to the unfolding confrontation. Thomas knew he was trapped. No amount of charm or excuses could save him now. The weight of his actions and the judgment of those around him pressed down like an avalanche. Finally, James turned and walked away, leaving Thomas standing there, humiliated and exposed. The whispers resumed, but they were different now, harsher, more cutting. Wow, he got what he deserved. Serves him right. Thomas stood frozen, his mind racing. For the first time in his life, he had no clever words, no quick escape. He was left with nothing but the cold, hard reality of his downfall. How would you have handled the situation if you were in Thomas's shoes? Was there a better way to make things right? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever experienced something similar? Let's hear your stories. Don't forget to like and share if the story resonated with you. The story was created to raise awareness about respect, accountability, and the power of dignity. It's a reminder that our actions, big or small, have real consequences. Together, we can shed light on these issues and make the world a better place,